talking. The Athletic just dropped a big article from Andy Mitten, friend of the podcast. You know, Andy.
Friend of the pod.
We've had it out.
You've had it. Tell them about that story. So that's one of the greats. One of the great ARD stories.
The Andy Mitten stories. He did Ed Woodward softball interview. I tweeted him and called him out. He blocked us. Then I saw him selling the fanzine outside Crystal Palace Stadium, and then confronted him like a Curb Your Enthusiasm moment where
great.
He started like, I told him,
"What are you doing?" I turned around.
John's
arguing with Andy Mitten. I'm like, deal with our tickets.
And then he turns around, and me and Andy Mitten in the street are like going at it, like yelling at each other, like kind of like because he got really upset because like. I was like, hey, you blocked me on the internet. He's like, comes, and I was like, hey, man, I was just saying, like, maybe ask Woodward a couple.
Didn't you call him out for you called him out for the Woodward?
The Woodward, it was but he's also saying, he's like, he said, what do you want me to do?
It's true.
Which is like, yeah, he's got to ask easy questions to get the interview, and like, this is how he makes his living. Totally understand. So I like Andy Mitten. I think he also came out with he kind of balances club fluff with some hard hitting. Like I think the Rashford was a little that was pro club, but he kind of said, "Hey, a lot of people have had problems with Rashford." I thought he kind of went out on a limb. He got a lot of stick for that, but I think he was telling us straight. Whenever he shoots us straight, I take what Andy Mitten says at the truth. But there's like this article with the Amorim appointment. The title is The Secret Meetings Behind Ruben Amorim's Manchester United Appointment 1 year on, and this kind of goes through the whole Erik ten Hag to Ruben Amorim appointment, describing it from the United perspective behind the scenes. If you want to read it, you can get at The Athletic. Obviously, there's a paywall, but I think it's pretty cheap to sign up for the first year. As far as things we found out in the article, the United board came in to the new ownership and they made a short list. So they said, hey, get me analytics. As far as Ten Hag was underperforming ahead of the final, and they were like, hey, we got to have a meeting. We got to think about who the next manager is going to be because this guy ain't it. So before the FA Cup final, it was accurate. Ten Hag's job was sort of on the line. They were looking at other candidates. And that list, the qualifications for the list was, we want someone who has EPL experience and can play 4-3-3 and all the advanced stats show that with our roster, they would do well. So that was sort of the lens of the search. And as a result of that, they got Thomas Tuchel, Pochettino, Zerbi, Thomas Frank, Marco Silva, and Graham Potter. Those were the 6 that came. They said, hey, data nerds, give us the top names. And essentially it came down to
Tuchel and Zerbi.
Like Tuchel and Zerbi. Tuchel had just been fired from Bayern, and he was a little cagey on coming to United.
Right.
So they never made a financial offer. That part of the article, I think, is bullshit.
Yeah, so do I.
So there's a lot of stuff here that you have to kind of read the tea leaves because they're basically like, oh, they made it sound like Tuchel didn't want a job. I think Tuchel, he came out and said he wanted the United job. He flirted with United. I feel like they thought it would cost too much money, and then they went for Zerbi. They offered Zerbi the job and a contract. He denied the job. He wanted more money, and INEOS didn't counter. This is kind of confusing, and this is after the FA Cup final. So when they're doing these talks and offers, this is after the FA Cup final when we're just waiting for them to fire Ten Hag, and they don't. And they're kind of playing like footsie with Tuchel and Zerbi. The timing in this article is also very interesting.
It is.
The fact that just like, if you're going to make a call, you got to make it fast, and you got to just go all in. Be like, and also, by the way, if I'm going to fire my manager, I'm going to know, and I'm going to talk to you guys. I'm going to know what they want. I'm going to know what the agent, what do they want? Are they available? I'm not going to talk to Tuchel if he's not available. I'm not going to talk to Zerbi if he's not available. I'm not going to talk to Zerbi if I don't know his number.
You can't afford him, right?
Yes, it's a waste of time,
right?
Which is exactly what they did for 2 weeks, and then we all know they didn't counter Zerbi. Then they went with like, oh, let's not fire. So this is where the spin zone of the article starts happening, where they're like, United felt that Ten Hag should be given another chance. And then when they fire him, they say that they knew the communication wasn't good. So like all the issues they knew were with Ten Hag existed, but they didn't act on them. And so he's trying to spin it in a way that makes the decision sound logical. Like, no, manager, we couldn't get anybody, you know. Actually, you didn't want to pay for anyone, and then you decided actually the cheap route would be keep Ten Hag. And so ultimately it came down to a financial decision with the 20 million or so, or 15 million we owed Ten Hag if we fired him. I think article doesn't mention that. Article doesn't mention the VIG about Ten Hag and how that probably played a role in the decision. and ultimately why finances could have been driving this poor manager call. So I feel like there was an effort here to sort of shine up the Ten Hag error.
As there would be. And shine up the INEOS era. I mean, the big telling thing, it's a very interesting article. It definitely has a certain amount of fluff, but it speaks to how all over the place United's ownership and structure has been, which we've seen over INEO, right? Dan Ashworth in, Dan Ashworth out, Erik Ten Hag in, Erik Ten Hag out. It just like there was no consistency in the decision-making. The mandate by which they wanted to approve and decide on a manager changed over the course of the summer, and you don't really know when it changed. It kind of feels like they wanted to get one of two managers. Even after the FA Cup final, they couldn't like rationalize the expense. They're like, fuck it, let's just run back Erik Ten Hag. He won that cup. Maybe that'll galvanize something. And then that all fell apart. And then they were kind of left like spinning mid-season. I bet you a lot of those, not all those, some of those managers went. Obviously, Pochettino went to the U.S. Tuchel went to England.
But that was after this period with Town. They had all these managers available, and they could have gotten
in the summer before they doubled down on Ten Hag.
No, yeah, before they doubled down. Like this was the moment that.
But in the fall, when things started falling apart, and they had to get Amorim because the options got a lot shorter. Right? A few of these guys went away.
Yeah. So before we get to the Amorim point of the article, I think it's really interesting to think about the Ten Hag, because this is where the error was made. The error was made where they didn't sack Ten Hag and then just find another. It's like grow up, sack him, get another manager. Like, by the way, that list: Tuchel, Poch, Zerbi, Frank, Silva, Graham Potter, EPL proven that play the exact way that the squad was developed for. Nobody can shake your head at that. Maybe Graham Potter would have been a bad decision, but if you went with Frank, Silva, Zerbi, Poch, or Tuchel, you really can't
cover your ass.
It's in the summer.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming out, Ten Hag. All the new signings are going to be for the new manager, etc. Instead, they botched that. They tried to make it about money with the Zerbi or something. It didn't really. That's where I kind of look at the article to be like, come on. And then what's even crazier in this article is they don't mention Ashworth at all. Really, they mention Ashworth, but they don't mention that Ashworth didn't want Amorim. Right? They didn't mention the whole jockeying for the next manager and how the director of football was like cut out. Like, I feel like that's the entire story here with Ruben Amorim is like Ashworth didn't think that we should head this way, and then Berrada did, and then that was the infighting, and then ultimately Ashworth left right after Amorim was appointed. I feel like that's the entire story, but that's what United doesn't want out there, and that's why this is obviously like a pro United like sort of telling the press how we, from our point of view, non-controversially, how this appointment came, and as far as why we appointed Amorim, all of a sudden the article just has a right turn and says, a further meeting in Barcelona was to discuss who the new coach would be. Quote, it was then the consensus the executives landed on Amorim with zero color.
Ratcliffe, dude.
Of how
it's so
no, but so they literally talk about how the shortlist post FA Cup final was created with all this analytics, the analytics team, the criteria, everything. And then you finally get to like how they got to Amorim. They're like, well, we just decided it was Amorim. And they don't mention, there's no how of how they got from EPL proven 4-3-3 analytical based approach for appointment to Ruben Amorim, who is none of those things. They don't link that at all. There's no how. There's no why. It's all how. They talk about meetings in a villa outside the room. They don't talk about why they appointed Amorim or why they just departed from their analytical approach.
Well, they did. I know why, because the analytical approach was probably driven by Dan Ashworth being like, yes, this is how I would think about it. I would think about a manager who's proven in the EPL. We've seen how important that is. And at the same time, we'll maximize the players you already have at your disposal. That was how they came up with that shortlist. It's not a bad shortlist to be. Graham Potter shouldn't be there, but that's actually a pretty good short list. And then he was out. He was a persona non grata. He got the boot, and then they're like, fuck it, it's vibes.
Which they don't mention in the article.
Yeah, but you could tell
they
that's
don't
Ratcliffe.
Mention
based on the decisions made and him in the press, you could tell Ratcliffe was like, well, I like his vibe.
But they don't mention that in the article. No, so the whole idea is that like they don't, it's like they try to, and then they shine up all the signings. They go signing by signing when they sign Dutch players that Ten Hag wanted, and then they try to shine that up as
they didn't mention that though. They said it was
they did shine it up as like, hey, Wilcox wasn't in yet, Berrada wasn't quite in yet. It's a really friendly to United article. The one thing they do say is when Amorim was interviewed by them, he said, "Why do I have to come now? Why can't I come at the end of the season?" Which I think was a valid point. United pushed for him to come mid-season. Berrada also said he still thinks it's the right decision, even though it went horribly. like, again, like my points on the article, it's worth a read, but it's very friendly to INEOS. It plays up the chaos and like how tough it was for them. Very defensive of the Erik ten Hag signings and keeping Erik ten Hag, making it kind of like they couldn't have got another manager. And like, it doesn't talk about the Ashworth thing at all, where, you know, they departed from him and went with sort of Berrada. It's just, I don't know. It just kind of shows United's trying to explain these decisions, and I'm not really buying the explanation put out there.
Well, we're watching. I mean, we're paying attention to this club so much, following every movement, every piece of news. It has been haphazard. It has been a little bit like, you know, not thoughtful, a little reactionary. We've seen some of the decision making, and I think this article, in some ways, even though it's a puffy, I mean, not a full puff piece, but puffy piece, is that it's like,
no, it omits
it's all over
things.
the place, but it feels all over. It's like they went from here to here. You said, right? They don't really explain how they got from one place to another, but the decision making is not consistent across like year 1 versus year 2, and I think it's because Sir Jim is like basically some old guy in Monaco making the call.